Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from the Audio Wave Network studios on the Lower East Side here in the city, powered by the East Side Community Network and sponsored by none other than the Ford Foundation, now a content partner to BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Orlando Bailey, and my trusted co-host, Donna Davidson, is still on a much-deserved vacation for the next week or so. So we are sending her well wishes and good vibes as she relax, relate, and releases, as Debbie Allen said on The Cosby Show. Thank you for listening again and supporting our efforts to build a platform of authentic voices for real people on the east side of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. We drop a new episode every week, so be sure to turn on those notifications. Joining me today is the Detroit Griot, one of our resident historians, storyteller, movie consultant, and now professor. You may have participated in one of his historical tours with the Black Scroll Network. He also happens to be cool with Don Cheadle. What? Jamon Jordan. Welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Hello. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for bringing me on, Orlando. The Emmy Award-winning Orlando Bailey.
Oh, gosh, man. Oh, JG with the applause. Listen, Jamon, I am so excited. I got to tell you that, Donna and I have a really amazing friendship and we don't really get jealous of each other at all. But I guarantee you that she's jealous that she's not here in the studio with you today because, listen, we've been on the air now for 2 years? This is Jamon Jordan's first time joining us on the podcast and I get them all to myself. I'm so excited.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for saying yes. How you been?
I've been doing well. And just a lot of things have happened in the last few weeks, and I'm happy to be a part of some of this stuff that has happened.
Yeah, Jamon, it's good to see you doing well. I know that it has been somewhat of a tumultuous year. I know we've been following. Yeah. We're Facebook friends, and we're cool in real life, and I know we've been following each other's journeys. And so, how are you doing is really, a weighted,
yes, it is
a weighted question. Yeah. But I'm seeing some great news as it relates to your children. What your kids up to?
So yes, my oldest two have, of course, both graduated from college, one from U of M, and she is going to be pursuing medicine. So she plans to be a physician. And then my second eldest graduated from Michigan State, and she's going to be going over across the pond over to Cambridge for her master's and then returning to the United States for law school. So, So I'm proud of both of them. They're both smarter than I am. And,
I find that hard to believe.
And I need them to keep me on my toes.
A doctor and a lawyer. I wish you guys were in the studio so you can see how puffed up Jamon's chest is when he talks about his children, man. So I'm excited to talk to you specifically about some of the things and the happenings that's around Black Bottom and the historical marker. We'll get into that a little later. But let me tell you what Detroit has missed. Number one, we've missed seeing and being a recipient of the knowledge and the presence of a Jamon Jordan, right? So what is coming up? Like tours coming back? What are we doing? What you up to?
So, of course, the African World Festival is coming up just in a couple of weeks. And every year for the last 6 years, I lead tours at the African World Festival in the neighborhood where the African World Festival occurs, which is near the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. So that neighborhood, that cultural center neighborhood, that Midtown neighborhood has a lot of African American history. So I lead about a 1 mile walking tour, lasts about an hour and a half or so, right there, and they're free. So we meet at the lobby of the Charles H. Wright Museum, and I take a group of people. We walk around the neighborhood. Like I said, it's about a mile of walking. And in an hour and a half, we return back to the African World Festival, and they are enriched by the history that is contained in that neighborhood.
Listen, man, it's so much to know about the city. And Jamon, you are a bottomless well of knowledge, man. I mean, even going back to, some of the streets that we know and love and how we pronounce them and where they came from. I mean, you just have all of that in your arsenal, and you arm Detroiters with, a history that makes us very, very proud to be Detroit, proud to be a Black Detroiter.
That's right. So of course, part of why I do what I do is so that people in the city of Detroit will have this knowledge. What I found sometimes in my teaching this history is that there are a lot of people who come from outside of the city of Detroit and they know some of this history. And I don't like that they know some of this history and Detroiters don't know it.
Yeah, legit.
So even though I lead tours and I give lectures to people who are not from the city of Detroit and not from the state of Michigan, my overwhelming mission is to arm Detroiters and give Detroiters this information so that they feel that they have a vested control over the story, the narrative, and the history of the city of Detroit.
JG, can we get a round of applause for Jamon Jordan one more time, man? I think it is just amazing work that you are doing, and you make it you put it so plain and you put it in our laps. And I have always been a student of history, a lover of history. I see it like movies, but I think anybody can latch on to the history in the way that you teach it, and that is a gift, man. That is so rich, and I can't wait for everybody who hasn't yet to be a recipient of your teaching. Listen, it's time for Fresh Off the Press, news that we are thinking about. If you have pieces that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. Fresh off the press, more police presence won't save communities. Defunding police will. Exclusive USA Today poll shows Detroit residents call for more cops, but police aren't coming to save us. We have to save ourselves. This is an op-ed by Aaron Keith in USA Today. Aaron Keith is an attorney on staff at the Detroit Justice Center. So we will make sure that we put this story in the description of our podcast. But, Aaron Keith takes us on a journey as in her life, so to speak. It's sort of semi-autobiographical when she talks about growing up near a Sinai Grace hospital, and Sinai Grace being one of the trauma treatment centers here in the city of Detroit, hearing sirens and hearing gunshots, and that being a regular occurrence for her, but also growing up in a middle-class family in what folks to this day would still consider a really, really nice neighborhood. But one of the things that we know about really nice neighborhoods with, a house on every lot and tree canopy is that it's almost always adjacent to a neighborhood that ain't so nice, right? That don't always have the same kind of amenities. And one of the things that she talks about is, she called it a popular misconception, is that those who want to divest from policing and invest in the needs of the people of Detroit are out of touch with reality, and that we're just pie in the sky thinkers and dreamers who want to burn it all down without acknowledging the situations our communities are grappling with. For me, that is simply false. And one of the things that she draws out so eloquently in this op-ed is a recognition of the current conditions, right? The current conditions of crime, where we are finding ourselves, and how sometimes crime tends to knock on our door, even break our doors down, and the community's need and want for safety, but also her advocacy against defunding the police and resourcing and refunding the community, right? And we've been having this conversation, since the likes of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. We've been having this conversation about safety. We have a former police chief that's running for governor and is touting his record as the police chief in the city of Detroit. But Detroit ain't really gotten safer since since he was appointed through emergency management under Governor Rick Snyder. And so what we are seeing here is this tension to want to be safe without punitive policy or living in a police state. Jamon Jordan, what say you about this tension?
So there's this long history, and we kind of have to understand this history to kind of understand the whole argument around defund the police and around the issue of what the police are ought to be doing. Let's first understand that historically, the police are not about crime prevention. So let's start there. That, modern policing in the United States was not created around crime prevention. So the first thing, and even to this day, we don't think of the police before a crime. The police are someone you contact after a crime has been committed.
Yeah.
So we know that that's the whole purpose of the police in modern day society is not to prevent crime. It is to deal with a crime that's already happened.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about crime prevention, there's some other things that ought to be talked about. And in the late 1800s, early 1900s, this kind of talk was really being done around juvenile justice. So now we need to kind of think of what was being talked about around juvenile justice, which never fully came to fruition, but was talked about. We need to start thinking about that in the justice system in total. So what was being talked about in the late 1800s and early 1900s during this reform era of the United States was that if you work with giving people the things they need, you'll have less of a reason to punish them for doing something that they ought not be doing. And so for children, of course, at that time who were being treated as adults, they were working in factories, they were being abused, they were being forced to work 12, 14, 15 hours. If they committed some kind of crime, they were being thrown in jail with adults. And so wealthy reformers and middle-class reformers began to start a movement to separate juvenile crimes from adult crimes. And so therefore the juvenile justice system was created out of that thinking.
But we still have so many juvenile lifers.
That's right. So it never came to fruition, but the idea was originally to give those juveniles, if they weren't eating correctly, to give them nutrition and food. If they weren't being nurtured and they weren't being cared for by people, to give them people who would care for them. If they weren't being trained to be able to make a life for themselves, to be a carpenter or a shoemaker or a barber, then you give them training, and that they would cycle their way out of a criminal justice system and be given an education, be given health care, be given food, and that would take care of them. Well, that kind of thinking, although it never was 100% implemented, in as much that it was implemented, it created a much better reality for young people who were caught up in this, in what was the former criminal justice system, where there was no difference between juvenile justice and the criminal justice system. It created a much better reality for them than had they been thrown in jail with the adults at 11 years old, 12 years old. Now we need to start thinking of that for everyone.
Everybody.
There are people who need mental health services. They're not criminals just because they want to be criminals. They need mental health services. There are people who need health care, need food, need a place to stay, need someone to care about their life, need education. We find need to learn how to read and write. One of the things we find that is common for the average person going into prison is their literacy level. And so if we provide these things and put much more of our resources towards those things, we will have less of a so-called juvenile or criminal justice system to deal with, and less of a need for police to deal with crimes after the fact. People have already been shot. People have already been beaten and assaulted. People have already been robbed. People have already been sexually assaulted, and all of these other forms of crime. We want to deal with those things before the crimes happen, and much more of the resources need to be going that way.
Erin points to a few things systemically that she believes is, cause for the psycho-emotional state of some of us that commit crime. And she says, look at, the lawsuit around the students' right to literacy, the fallout for the city's tax base, the lack of employment opportunities. I remember hearing stories, coming up about plants just closing and putting signs on gates, and the lack of reliable public transit to get to remaining opportunities in the region. Overtaxation of city homeowners, lack of affordable housing for renters, mental illness, and, the consequences of over-policing that really show up even now in how we perpetuate ourselves in society. Why is there always such a visceral reaction when we talk about defund the police? Why is this so hard for people to grapple with?
Well, one thing is America has embedded itself in this idea of police as heroes. So part of it is this whole systemic issue, but there's also just this psychological job that's been done on the people in America to view the police almost as an extension of the United States military. And the way that military,
it's very militarized, yeah.
And the way that the military is glorified as heroes and warriors, and they're fighting for America's democracy, and they're fighting for our freedoms. On a slightly level under that, police have been placed in those same positions. And so people see police as the heroes of society, not as one of the symptoms of some of the problems of society. But we ought to take a much more critical look at the history of policing, number one, but definitely the history of policing as it deals with the African American community.
Yeah.
And so if we begin to delve into that history, we will see that there's always been this history. And you don't have to go back all the way to the period of slavery and the police being patrollers and slave patrols and bounty hunters and people who assisted slave catchers and returning back black people back into their enslavers, their slave owners. You don't even have to go back that far. Just look at a reel from the 1950s and 60s during the Civil Rights Movement. You'll see one of the groups of people that the civil rights protesters always had to deal with, who were always on the other side of the civil rights movement, were police officers. Yeah. It is the police officers who are arresting these black people and putting them in prison because they're trying to desegregate a lunch counter, because they're trying to register to vote.
Following orders.
Yeah, so you see this problem is systemic. It's been this inequality in the criminal justice system, starting with police officers for all kinds of reasons. But even when black people are fighting for justice, it is generally the police who are the opponents of this. And what we see is in the protests that happened last year, but even in the protests before that, overwhelmingly the protesters, despite whatever rhetoric they're giving, they are nonviolent. They're not attacking people. They're not destroying property. It is the police who generally engage the protesters on a violent level. It is the police who take it to the next level and begin the violence, the attacks of the protesters.
I mean, they're still in court. And
so,
BPD right now.
So this is the history, particularly as it deals with the African American community, and every kind of uprising, rebellion, or riot that happened in the city of Detroit, the police in the city of Detroit are at the center of that. And so, and of course, I'm talking about Detroit, but if I was in Chicago, I would be saying the same thing about Chicago. If I was in Watts, I'd be saying the same thing about Watts. If I was in Newark, New Jersey, I'd be saying the same thing about that.
Wherever a concentration of black folk are,
you see
this same
kind of cycle going on.
Wow. So Aaron Keefe cites the $317 million that the police spent from the city's general fund. That's far more than the $22 million is spent on housing, or even in the health department in the year of the pandemic. And so not only is she calling out some of the systemic problems, but she's also recommending, breaking down that $317 million that we spent on policing within the span of 1 year to build restorative justice centers, robust violence intervention program, mental health and rehab facilities, modernize some of the schools, and, creating, living wage jobs. I encourage you to go on usatoday.com and read the rest of the story. It really is a story that carries this tension, because Detroiters do want to be safe, and Detroiters do not want to be victims of crime, right?
That's right.
But how can we do that in a way where we're not living under a militarized police state in the city of Detroit? Because no one wants that. We've already seen the harmful effects of social, facial recognition technology and how it disparately identifies black folks. This green light program. I mean, we got to get Tawana Honeycomb Petty on here to talk about surveillance and safety, but all of those things. Is that what we really want? in a reaction to when something happens to us or when we are wronged? Are we being reactionary and giving up our rights as citizens to, a certain amount of privacy when we talk about, a police state in the city of Detroit and safety in the city of Detroit? There's certainly more to come. Fresh off the press, breaking down the reasons why Detroit voters didn't show up. So, we late because we record on Tuesdays and the last election was last Tuesday. So here we are. There are so many people talking about the low voter turnout in the city of Detroit. So breaking down the reasons why Detroit voters didn't show up. This is by Bryce Huffman for BridgeDetroit.com. And Bryce talked to a few folks, but his lead says most Detroiters didn't vote in Tuesday's primary because of apathy, ineffective leadership, underfunded elections, and weakened grassroots network, election officials and political observers say about the August 3rd turnout. So the people that Huffman talked to are all pointing to, to those things. And so what we know, what we found out the day before the election from the city clerk is that they were expecting about 50,000 absentee ballots, and they were expecting about 15,000 people in the city of Detroit to show up in person. So what we now know is that less than 15% of registered voters in the city voted. So that's about 71,375 Detroiters that voted in the primary last Tuesday. And so we're hearing all kinds of things about apathy, ineffective leadership, underfunded elections, and weakened grassroots networks. But, I'm kind of the mindset, can we go talk to the citizenry and ask them like the average Detroiter, why you ain't voting if you didn't vote, right? Jamon Jordan, what say you?
So, of course, I'm a historian. So I always think in I always have a historical outlook or worldview of how things are.
That's why we love you.
So I can't start with where things today. So I can't start with election day last week. I can't. Was it? Yeah, it was last.
It was a week ago today.
Yeah, a week ago. So I can't start there. I got to start with this long history. When it comes to first elections in America, now of course last year was a record-breaking election. We've had record-breaking presidential elections before. So when we think of those elections and we juxtapose those versus the next local election, then it looks really bad. But historically, local elections, people do not vote overwhelmingly in local elections. And before last year, and when we're not talking about presidential elections in general, people vote less. But even in presidential elections in America, it's a great election if you get 50% of the registered voters to vote.
All over America.
All over America. If 50% of the people vote in a presidential election, that's considered great. Now in Australia, 85 to 90% of the people go to vote on election day, go to the polls on election day. So America is abysmally low in voting already. And part of the reason is there is this break between the political structure of America and the general populace. The people, the general citizenry, do not see themselves as a part of the system that creates the government. They don't see themselves as playing a role in the people who are there. They don't see themselves as my vote will change or have some effect on the way this country is run. And that's purposeful. The way the system is set up, it is set up to make you think that it has nothing to do with you, that this is a system that is run by people who are better able to run it than you, the citizens, are able to run it. And so because of that, most people don't see themselves connected to that system. However, you would think it would be different for local elections because it
affects our day to day. It affects the day to day.
You're more likely
Politics
to run into
local.
a city council member than you are the
or
president,
a judge, or a mayor.
So you would see that as more likely to happen. So one of the first things that ought to be happening is there needs to be a much more stronger infrastructure to elections. And we saw some of that happen last year with COVID.
So tell me what you mean by that, because I know that the city of Detroit has the largest voter electorate in the state. We have about 500,000 registered voters in the city of Detroit, and the city clerk has to run the biggest election in the state, right?
So the first thing is we need to keep some of the things that have been happening since COVID, which of course is voting by mail.
Yeah. Drop boxes.
No excuse. Early voting.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have an excuse. I'm leaving out of the country next week, so I want to vote today. No, you can just early vote. I want to go in early vote. So you need to keep those structures in place. There needs to be a much more massive level of voter information. So voter education is woefully low. And it's woefully low, not just from the clerk's office, from the whole educational system, the whole media system. So going to school, learning about government in school has no direct connection to what's going on in your own neighborhood.
Locally, yeah.
It has no, so you may learn about the president. You may learn about the three branches of government. You may know there's executive, judicial, and legislative. You may learn even about Congress and the Senate. There's a House of Representatives, and then there's a Senate. Yeah. And this is how a bill is presented. This is how you veto. But what about the fact that the city has a strong mayor form of government with a city council. City council is broken up into districts.
Branch, yep.
So this part is not a part of our education. You kind of got to get it on your own. And so the people who are tuned in, those are the people who vote in almost every election. But we already know that the masses of people aren't tuned in to any institution. You have to kind of bring them in. And part of that bringing them in is an educational pursuit. It's an educational campaign. And so that has to be done on every level, not just the clerk's office, although that it should happen there. It should happen in our schools. It should happen by our media, our newspapers, our TV media.
Shout out to Bridge Detroit and the Free Press for a voter guide. I just want to say, because, you know, folks talked about, and this is a critique that I hear and that I kind of chalk up and I don't really, you know, respond to it. But sometimes it's frustrating, and I'll air it right now.
Right.
That, you know, there's often, you know, this critique of media for not doing its job in terms of like the kind of coverage that lets readers and the public know that there is an election, right? Yeah. And I kind of snarl at that critique a little bit as a member of the media. Like, we worked on a whole voter guide. We covered Proposal P comprehensively. And so I think blanket generalizations about these industries are, you know, ain't always right. But I'm liking what you're saying, because most folks will actually really look to the clerk, but you're making the case that this needs to start at the primary educational level.
That's right.
How do we bring the communities into the schools to teach about local politics?
That's right. That's exactly right. And so what we found is basically around the country, when it comes to local elections, it's about 15 to 25% of the registered voters who vote in local elections. So Detroit is about where most cities are when it comes to this. They're not.
Yeah, but can I get at the narrative around this a little bit, though? And I want you to help me unpack this, because Detroit is a majority Black city. And so when we talk about participation in democracy and it being a privilege, right? I really do feel like the narrative can be skewed that these Black people in the city of Detroit don't care about democracy. They don't. They don't participate. How do we begin to reframe that this is something that's typical, but typical around the nation in majority Black cities and majority white cities and spaces? Yeah.
So one of the things is, as much as you feel connected to the system of the election system, the people who are your representatives, your mayors, your city council members, your judges, as much as you feel connected to them or connected to the system that produced them, you are more likely to participate. As much as you feel disconnected from those systems, if they don't have anything to do with you or they don't work out in your best interest, you're less likely to be a part of it and less likely to vote for them. So it should not come as much of a surprise that young people vote less than older people. So that shouldn't come as a surprise because young people see this system as not being a much less about them than older people who have lived a long time and they care about their 401k or their pension or their social security or their Medicare.
Yeah, legit.
They see how politics has something to do with their lives. They've seen their
democratic rights taken away in Detroit. Yeah.
So it should not come as a surprise that older people are more likely to vote than younger people. It also should not come as a surprise that whites are more likely to vote than African Americans. And part of the reason why is because African Americans have been forcefully disconnected from this system. And
thank you for that.
Right, they've been forcefully disconnected from the system. They voted for people and voted in large numbers, particularly after the civil rights movement and the fight for the right to register to vote, particularly in the South. They voted at higher levels than whites. However, what ended up happening is the people they voted for, the powers were stripped from those people. So as black places became more black or black controlled, the powers that used to exist in those places when they were predominantly white were stripped away.
So Coleman Young, as powerful as he was, should have been even more powerful than he was.
That's exactly right. And so we see now some of us can remember it in our own lives. So if you weren't old enough to be around in the 70s to see what mayors were like, what Mayor Cobo was doing versus what Coleman could do, what Coleman Young could do, or what later happened when Dennis Archer becomes the mayor. When Coleman Young was the mayor, and when all the mayors prior to Coleman Young were the mayor, if you worked for the city of Detroit, you had to live in the city of Detroit. So if you worked for the water department, if you worked for the police department, if you worked for the fire department, on paper at least, you had to live in the city of Detroit. After Coleman Young, but they were working on it while he was mayor, but after he's no longer the mayor,
at the state level,
the state removes that power from the city, and now anybody from whatever city can come and work in the city of Detroit.
Bucky Willis, a good friend of mine, said on the podcast last week, she was like, I'm one of those people that say it went all downhill when the state forced, residency to be lifted.
And of course, we know all of us can remember in our lifetimes as what happened to school boards, what happened to the city itself under emergency management.
That trauma.
Now, and that's a trauma. And that was our extreme versions of the taking away of power. Yeah. But there were less extreme, less overt versions of this that have been happening in every city as it became more black. Another extreme version would happen. And of course, I'm a historian. So in Washington, D.C.
Chocolate City.
In Washington, D.C., back right after, in fact, it started during the Civil War. So during the Civil War, they were going to do basically a test case of allowing black people to vote in city elections in Washington, D.C. So the Civil War ain't even over. Black people in the South there are still black people enslaved in the South. But black people are now free in Washington, D.C., and they're allowing them to vote in city elections. By the 1880s, black people are dominating the city elections in Washington, D.C. Congress will vote to take this power away. And so before we get to the modern D.C., when it becomes a city again and people can vote in local elections, that power was taken away because black people were dominating the elections. They were voting at higher numbers than the whites. They were running for office at higher numbers than whites. And they had taken over the control of the city of Washington, D.C. Not, of course, where the federal government seat is, but the city. And so that was the power of voting in local elections was taken away in Washington, D.C. This is a systemic thing and a historic thing that has happened. So for good reason, black people feel disconnected from the electoral process because when they dominate, when they vote the most, when they run for office, and when they're the dominant groups, the power that used to exist when the area was predominantly white is gradually, in most cases, taken away. But of course, we see in some cases it wasn't gradual. It was overt, it was blatant, and it was quick. And so, particularly in cities throughout Michigan during the era of emergency management, we saw that happen. We saw what happened in Flint. We saw what happened in Detroit. We saw what happened in Benton Harbor. We saw what happened in Highland Park. And so we have this other history of we vote these black folks in office, and sometimes we're mad at them And we may not fully understand that the power that we used to see when it was a predominantly white city or a predominantly white city council or a white mayor does not exist when African Americans are at the helm.
Yeah. Oh, we could stay there forever because, one of the things that I will also tease out is something that I talked about last week, and that is for the Black folks that we elect and come into power and come in close proximity with all kinds of privileges that the rest of us don't enjoy because of the internalization of white supremacy and white supremacist narratives. The oppression that you are talking about, both gradual and overt and very traumatic and instant, is inflicted by those same folks. And so we also have to account for that. But that is definitely a conversation for another day. That wraps up our fresh off the press segment. If you have pieces that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. Jamon Jordan has his hands in so many things, but lately he has been hard at work helping to erect a historical marker for Old Black Bottom. The marker is up and has been officially dedicated. Jamon, I guess my first question for you as it relates to this, and we want to hear about the erection of the historical marker, but one of the things that you said acre for acre that the Lower East Side of Detroit is the most historically important, culturally significant area in the history of the state of Michigan.
That's right.
Let's make all of the West Siders mad, and you tell us why that is.
All right. So yes, Black Bottom, of course, which was named after this rich, dark soil that was really fed by a number of creeks and rivers, but especially the Savoyard River, which is the name that the French would give it. The Savoyard River, which is this creek that kind of pooled at what is now Lafayette Park, near Lafayette Park. It pooled kind of there. A vein of it ran down what is now the DeQuinder Cut, ran through the downtown area of the city of Detroit, and then emptied out into the Detroit River in southwest Detroit. Okay. But this river helped to create this dark, rich, minerally rich soil. When the indigenous people were here prior to the French, and I want you to be clear that the Anishinaabe were here way before 1701. All right, so
happy birthday, Detroit!
Right. So, and they called this place Wawiatunong, and they settled, hunted in this area, so they were there. And then the French arrived in 1701, and they built a fort for Pontchartrain du Detroit. Antoine de la Motte Cadillac leads this. He's, of course, here to have a fur trade with other French who will be coming here, but also with the indigenous people, the Anishinaabe. And though the French are knee deep in the fur trade, they're also knee deep in a different trade, the slave trade. So the French bring Africans with them, the wealthy French, our slave owners. And so they're building farms trying to take advantage of this rich black soil, this fond noir that they call it, which is Black Bottom. They're trying to take advantage. So they build these ribbon farms, thin strip farms that run from the river and go north. And so we know their name, Louis Beaufait. We say Beaufait in
Beaufait,
Detroit. Yeah, right. And of course, the Campeau family. And of course, we say Joseph Campeau. That's right. And Noel St. Aubin. We say St. Aubin in Detroit. Alexander Shin. We say Shane in Detroit. Sean Rivard. Antoine Beaubien. We say Beaubien. We say Beaubien in Detroit. These are French ribbon farm owners, also slave owners.
My God.
And those streets run through, and many of them run through Black Bottom. And that was where their ribbon farms are. Those streets are basically aligned to where those ribbon farms are. The British come over. They take over in 1760 after the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War. And they copy the French. Hey, it works for you. We'll do it too. And so they build ribbon farms too. So we got George McDougal and his ribbon farm, and we just call it McDougal today. We got John Randolph. We got William McComb, which is the largest ribbon farm in Detroit's history, the longest ribbon farm. Most of the ribbon farms would have ended right around what is today Mack Avenue. So most of them would have either stopped before that or not gone past that. But his went all the way down to what is now Wayne State University's campus.
Wow.
McCombs went down. He sold it to the second territorial governor of Michigan, Lewis Cass. And so the street Cass was at one point the William McComb Ribbon Farm. But these are slave owners, ribbon farm owners, wealthy landowners in the city of Detroit, many of which are trying to take advantage of this rich, dark soil. But as they begin to leave farming and become businessmen, politicians, and what we now call the early Detroiters, as they become that, then they're replaced in that neighborhood by German immigrants, Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants, Syrian and Lebanese immigrants, Greek immigrants, Polish immigrants, but Black people are still there. So they were there with the French and British, but they're still there. And by this time, they have started the Underground Railroad. They have fought against slavery. They have started their early institutions.
So we were here before the Great Migration.
That's right. The Black people were here.
Talk about it.
In fact, it is their presence here that helps create the infrastructure to receive Black people during the Great Migration.
Talk about it.
So if you come from Mississippi in 1915 and come into the city of Detroit, well, you need to join a church. Well, there's already churches here that have been created by Black people who were here in the 1800s. And so the first church, of course, the Second Baptist Church.
Second Baptist.
The oldest Black church in the state of Michigan, founded in 1836 in this Lower East Side Black Bottom neighborhood.
Talk about it.
That's where they were. 30 churches come out of Second Baptist. So not only do you have Second Baptist, you got the kids of Second Baptist. You can go to those churches. You can go to Shiloh, which is now, of course, in the Brewsters. It's in the Brewsters, but you got Shiloh. You got St. John's Presbyterian, which is on Lafayette and the DeQuinder Cut. It's right on the corner of Lafayette and St. Alban. So you can go to St. John's if you're a Presbyterian. If you're a Methodist, you can go to Bethel AME, which was at was at Hastings and Napoleon at one point, but then in the middle of the Great Migration, they moved to Frederick near St. Antoine. And then you got hospitals. You got Dunbar Hospital being founded. You got Mercy Hospital founded in Brush Park, which is the first Black hospital in the city of Detroit. It's actually Mercy, founded in 1917 by Dr. Daisy and David Northcross, founded in what is now Brush Park, near Paradise Valley and Black Bottom. They are the first Black hospital founded in the city of Detroit. Dunbar is the second, founded in 1918. So you got all these institutions, all these structures, all of these churches and other businesses that are able to receive the Black folks that come from 1910 to 1930, that first leg of the Great Migration. And is that first leg of the Great Migration that will pair with these Black folks from the 1800s and their institutions that will create the Black business district known as Paradise Valley. Wow. And so you don't get this Black business district without Black Bottom. You don't get Black Bottom without the Underground Railroad in that fight, those early group of Black people here in the 1800s. So you got Black folks already here. But like I said, you also got all those immigrants. And so and they create their institutions. So you got Church of Our Holy Family, which still stands today on Hastings. Of course, that's Chrysler Service Drive, but Hastings between Larned and Lafayette. So you have that Italian Catholic Church founded in 1910. Why is it Italian Catholic Church there? Because there's Italian immigrants coming to the city of Detroit. You got Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church on Lafayette and Hastings. Why is there a Greek Orthodox Church there? Because you got Greek immigrants coming here. You got St. Peter and Paul Church, which is the oldest church structure, oldest church building in the city of Detroit. It's not an older congregation than St. Anne's, but it's an older building than St. Anne's because there's been about 4 St. Anne's. So the oldest is St. Peter and Paul. This is where U of D school was founded. University of Detroit was founded in that church. It was built by French Detroiters, but by the time it's fully built, the Irish end up making it their church. The French are going to different churches. That becomes an Irish church. Why? Because you got Irish immigrants living in the area.
So we got all of these folks coming in and settling in Black Bottom. When did Black Bottom become resoundingly Black?
Yeah. So when these people are coming from these other countries, they're being discriminated against. So you're coming from Germany and you're being treated like a foreigner.
You ain't white yet.
You ain't white. And so you're being treated, some people won't hire you. Number one, you're not rich. Most of the people are coming from Europe as immigrants are poor. So they can't buy their way into being treated as whites. And they speak with an accent. They got these funny customs. At least that's how they're viewed by white Americans. That they got these funny customs. So many of them are Jewish or Catholic, which of course are religions that are discriminated against by Protestants, by white Protestants. Mm-hmm. And so they're facing this discrimination. They got these names that people can call out. But then they have children. And their children don't speak with no accent.
Yeah.
All right. Ooh. And then they have grandchildren. Their grandchildren don't not speak with an accent. They got a job at Ford. Yeah. They got a job at Chrysler, Dodge, Maine. They make way more money than grandparents back from the old country. Yeah. So now they got money. They don't speak with an accent. You can't quickly identify them as an immigrant because they're not. They're born in America.
They're born in America. We out.
They're white.
They white.
So they've become white. Black people who come from the South, doesn't matter that they can
always
speak.
Black.
You're going to always be black. And so, and the federal government in the 1930s starts its housing program. And they're giving low interest rate home loans with a low down payment to white homeowners.
So the FHA gets started in the 1930s.
1934.
Okay.
So in 1934, the National Housing Act of 1934 creates the FHA. The FHA is now funding home loans to working class people, but overwhelmingly not black folks, of course, working class people.
Right.
And so now those grandchildren of immigrants who are now considered white can get a home loan. The caveat is they have to move away from black people to get that home loan. Yeah. The neighborhood cannot be racially integrated, which Black Bottom was prior to the 1930s. It has to be racially homogeneous. So if they want this gift from the federal government, they got to go. They got to leave black people.
My God.
And so they do. They move away from black people. Black people aren't able to get these loans to move into those white neighborhoods that white people are moving to. And they can't get them in their own neighborhood because the 1934 Housing Act creates not just the FHA, but the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which creates maps of where these home loans should go. The maps are color coded. Mm-hmm. If they're in a green neighborhood, then you get the loan.
Teach us.
If it's colored in blue on the map, you'll probably get the loan, but you might not be as low an interest rate as a green neighborhood. The yellow one, you might not get the loan. And if you do, your interest rate is going to be a little higher.
High.
And the red, you cannot get the loan.
Wow. That's so funny. And, the history for black folks on the East Side. And I think it's why the East Side feels so familial. And of course, I am a champion of the East Side. My great grandparents migrated here, or I say fled from Comita, Mississippi. Right. I don't know if it was a voluntary migration, right? In the 1930s or 1940s and settled in the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood. Our family home is still in our family today.
That's right.
615 Algonquin.
That's awesome.
And so I, as an older millennial, still having access to my great grandparents and my grandmother, I've always heard them talk about the richness and the magnificence that was Black Bottom, but I never could put together where it was, right? So tell us, number one, where it was, what were the boundaries?
That's right.
And
all right. So if we're just talking about the soil, then Black Bottom is humongous.
Yeah.
But we don't want to just talk about the soil. We really want to talk about the settlement, where people were actually living. And so, and you'll see different maps and you'll see different borders, but I'm going to give you my borders today. So on the east, the eastern border of Black Bottom are the cemeteries. Elmwood, Mount Elliott Cemetery. Okay. So McDougal, Mount Elliott area. That's the eastern border of Black Bottom. Okay. All right. Wow. So you got black people living there by the 1930s, living in that neighborhood. That's why I'm calling that the border, because prior to World War II, you got significant population of black people living in that area. Yeah. All right. And Joe Louis lives on McDougal and Chestnut. Yeah. So we got black people in that area. That is the eastern border of Black Bottom. Okay. The southern border of Black Bottom is, for some people, it's Larned. For some people, it's Jefferson. So I don't argue either way. It's not a big difference.
It's just a block.
Yeah, it's not a big difference.
Larned or Jefferson, it's a block. Yeah.
So if you say Larned, you're fine. Jefferson, you're fine. It doesn't go to the river unless you're just talking about the soil.
Okay.
So if they're talking about the soil, the soil is rich and dark all the way down to the river. Yeah. But black folks ain't really living right next to the river.
Okay.
Pre-1930.
I'm seeing
we stop it at Jefferson.
All right.
And there are mansions lining on Jefferson. And we still got some of the homes
still see some of them.
Some of the wealthy folks. And so, black folks weren't living there pre-1930. All right. So let's just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So then on the northern, the northern border, for most of Black Bottom is Verner. It's East Verner.
Wow.
But once you get to around the DeQuinder Cut, or what would have been the Grand Trunk Railroad at that time,
Gratiot area,
it becomes Gratiot.
Okay.
The northern border becomes Gratiot, and Eastern Market is another neighborhood.
Okay.
Once you cross over to Eastern Market, you've just left Black Bottom. All right. So that's the northern border, and the western border is brush.
Okay.
And so if you know brush, it runs right through Greektown.
Right through.
Well, Greektown was part of Black Bottom. That's why Second Baptist is
it's in right Greektown, right?
Greek immigrants
were there.
You're
blowing people's minds right now, Jamon Jordan.
Prior to the 1890s, black people are living there. So when Lucy and Thornton Blackburn escaped from slavery in 1831, they live on Fort near Brush. Fort Street was a East Side Street and a West Side Street. We know once Black Bottom was destroyed, Fort is it's only a little piece of Fort on the East Side now, but it used to be a much longer street through the East Side. So you got black folks living on Fort.
That's so.
You got the oldest institution in what is now Greektown. The oldest thing there is not Greek. Greek immigrants don't arrive until the 1890s. But Second Baptist Church has been on the corner of Monroe and Beaubien since 1857.
My God.
So they're the oldest thing in Greektown. Down the street, 1 block away, is the second oldest thing in Greektown. And it's not Greek either. It's St. Mary's German Catholic Church. Yeah. German Catholic Church. Because German immigrants are coming in the 1840s and 50s. And that's way before the Greek immigrants arrive in the 1890s. As German immigrants move north, and black immigrants or black people from the from down south during the Great Migration are moving and mainly settling east of Hastings, and Hastings, of course, is 375 today. Then that becomes known as Greektown. That's how that becomes part of Greektown. But it was part of Black Bottom. That is the borders of Black Bottom. The borders of Black Bottom are Brush, Gratiot, and East Verner, McDougal, and Larned/Jefferson. Yeah. That is Black Bottom.
Talk about the process for the process that you guys underwent to get this historical marker up. What was that like? Yeah. Because, I would always hear about it being like this utopian place. It really, as my grandmother describes it, and I can listen to her talk about it for hours. But I just thought it was a travesty that there was no kind of wayfinding signage, no sort of acknowledgement. Like it was almost as if it never existed. What was the process to get this marker erected?
So just as you say that, and I'm sure many people know that on this 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, which occurred in 1921, people may have learned that for decades, they were not allowed to teach. Teachers did not teach anything about Tulsa. You were not supposed to know what happened in Tulsa. So people grew up in Tulsa and didn't know about the race massacre that happened in the city that they grew up in. Well, although Detroit's Black Bottom wasn't destroyed in a race massacre, so it didn't happen that way. There was kind of this not wanting to tell the story of what happened.
It was still violent.
Yeah, it was, and so they did not want to tell this. You weren't supposed to know what happened, so you weren't supposed to know the borders. You wasn't supposed to know what happened. You were supposed to just applaud the fact that Lafayette Park got built. And that's it. You wasn't supposed to know nothing about what was there before, what happened to the people who were there before, the businesses that were there before, the streets that were there before. You weren't supposed to know nothing about none of that. And so that has been a process that has been unraveled by historians. And so I'm giving shout outs to Doc Yam Desjardins, who is the eminent historian. He is 97 years old.
Wow.
He is the eminent historian of Paradise Valley. He has worked with many people to help them better understand. So he has worked with businesses like the Joe Louis Southern Cafe. He's worked with businesses. He's worked with historians like me. Yeah. People like Ken Coleman, writer, historian, author, who has done a lot of the work, the legwork to unearth this history. Sisters like Sharon Sexton, who has done films and unearthed a lot of this history, even going back to the Underground Railroad. So there are people like that who have been unearthing this history. And because of this unearthing of the history, there are people who grew up in Black Bottom who are saying, well, it should be something to memorialize this. Right. And so Ray Smith, who is the founder of a business known as the Black Bottom Group.
Yeah, God bless that man.
That brother wrote a letter and then an application to the Michigan Historical Commission to have a marker placed in Black Bottom. Once he did that, Toby Voigt, who was formerly at the Detroit Historical Museum, but is now at the Michigan History Center, called me, and she called some other people too, but she called me and said, I got this application from Ray Smith. And I was like, I know Ray. And he wants to have a marker. And I was like, we need a marker. And she wanted to get an ad hoc committee together to work on making this marker happen. So that means the language that would appear on the marker, the site that would be chosen for the marker, and of course the money to be raised for the marker. Because in general, most markers in the state of Michigan, most of those Michigan historical markers, the state did not pay for those markers. The interested parties did. Sometimes there's citizens like you and me. Yeah. Sometimes there's a church. A church is historic and they want a marker. They pay for it.
Who pay for this
business? In this case, Ray Smith, the brother who wrote the letter and the application, paid the $4,000 for that marker. All right. And so he footed the bill for the marker. I was a part of the committee that we worked on the language of the marker. Of course, no one fully agrees ever with the language.
It's a two-sided marker, though.
It's a two-sided marker. It's a lot of information, so it is better than many markers in the city of Detroit. And we talked about where to go, and of course, I fought for it to be where it is because that's public property.
Tell us where it is.
It is at Lafayette Central Park, right across the street from Chrysler Elementary and the Lafayette Towers, right between 1300 Lafayette and the Ducharme Place. And so there's a public park there. And for me, it's always better to have markers in public spaces so that people who are walking by can stumble up upon some history. If you put it on a private land, then you may not have access to it. The owners can put a gate up and you don't see it. They can get rid of the marker. They can say, we don't want this marker anymore. We want it off our property. We can put it inside the lobby. And then unless you live there, you never get to see the marker. And so I don't like markers. I prefer them not to be on private property. I prefer them to be on public property. And so that is where it is.
Go see it, y'all. It's up. It's been dedicated. You need to go see it between 1300 Lafayette and the new Ducharme development. It's still kind of new, right?
Yeah, it is.
Right there in between the park, right across from the Lafayette Shopping Center and Chrysler Elementary School. Man, I have to tip my hat and give tremendous thanks to Jamon Jordan for finally saying yes to coming on to Authentically
I'm
Detroit.
happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you.
I like being on the east side.
We love having you on the east side.
Right,
it's family.
That's right.
It's family, right? So if you have any topics or discussions that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, of course, you can hit us up. Our special thanks to Jamon Jordan for coming in. Listen, we could talk all day, but I told Jamon I got him for an hour, and we both probably have other things that we have to get to. So I'm going to cut it short, but you got to come back. Can we get you to verbally promise that you're going to come back?
Of course I'll come back.
And you're taking a professorship. Can you talk about it?
So, I will be teaching at the U of M the University of Michigan. I'll be teaching at the Detroit Center.
Hey!
I'll be teaching at the Detroit Center. I'll be teaching the history of Detroit. So those students, my students, of course, will be students at U of M. There is a program at U of M called the Semester in Detroit, and where students spend a semester living in the city of Detroit and learning about Detroit and working with institutions and organizations in the city of Detroit. That's part of the class.
Professor Jordan.
And so I'll be doing the class part. And there'll be other organizations and institutions that'll be a part of it. So, I am
Come on, faculty,
starting.
let's go.
Right,
Listen, that's the class that I want to audit. Listen, I've got a couple of shout outs. I want to shout out Bucky Willis, Lauren Hood, and Chase Cantrell for joining us last week for an amazing episode. Shout out to my co-host who is absent, but will be back with us next week, Donna Givens-Davidson. I'm so happy that she has taken time for herself and her husband. I just love it. And, seeing them on Facebook in front of water and tropical places, I'm jealous. I can't wait for me to go out and see it. And also a shout out to Building Community Value, who has an application open for their Better Buildings, Better Blacks class. Go to bcvdetroit.org to apply right now. Jamon Jordan, you got shout outs?
Yeah, I got shout outs for Mama Myrtle and Baba Wayne Curtis.
Hey, Feed 'em Freedom
Growers. Yep. Those are my homies. Black Scroll Network History and Tours wouldn't really exist without Baba Wayne. So that's a long story, but Baba Wayne is part of the reason why there is a tour company called Black Scroll Network History and Tours. I sit on the board of Feed 'em Freedom Growers, and Jefferson Chalmers, of course, is just a hangout for me. I do a lot of stuff with Feed 'em Freedom. I bring groups there who work and see the work that's being done in that neighborhood. Of course, part of the film that I was a historical consultant for, a large part of it was filmed right in Jefferson Chalmers.
He's friends with Don Cheadle, yeah.
Including the clip that I'm in, the opening clip with Don Cheadle. Yep. So, in fact, we sat in that building in that morning and just kicked it in that recreated barbershop.
Don't tell me that.
So we sat there for about 2 hours just talking before he did that scene, which I actually know that part totally because he did it about 50 times. It was about the take. So I was there to hear him say it over and over again. Those are my shout outs.
All right. We thank y'all so much for listening, and we want you to catch the wave.